So it is complicated, Ugo. You're absolutely right. Nothing that comes from HUD that has to do with home is simple.
Right. And, hi, Lauren and Kathy. Sorry, we started the conversation earlier, but I was just basically complaining that given the amount of information that we received on Friday, I really didn't have enough time to read it all and to understand it and comprehend what we're going to be talking about today. And Sarah was just telling me that this is a normal procedure that we get the package on Friday. But when it has this amount of information, I would like to have, my weekend was, unfortunately, I couldn't even open it on before Monday, yesterday. And, it's pretty complex. So I was just telling him how uneasy I am to not have a full understanding of what we're speaking of today.
Acknowledged, it's a lot.
Yeah. And so why do you think you had trouble opening it?
No, I didn't have trouble opening it. I
Oh.
was just super busy over the weekend
Got it. Yeah.
and didn't have a chance to open it until Monday.
Okay.
And started reading it, but with work in between. So it's a lot of info for us to assimilate.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because it's not something we're not used to reading every day. So it's new information. Yeah.
Right. It's not rocket science, but it's very important.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Councilmember Revelle, I don't think we got any more than the 2 things that you forwarded.
Okay.
And we haven't been able to actually send them to everyone, but we will explain what was received.
Right. Great. Yeah. Because we want to have that in the.
Oh, no, there were 3, I think. I'm trying to find the last one, which was.
I sent you 3 things. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Because John Cleves was also had one. So
Right. Yeah.
that's the one I'm looking for now. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
We had a. Here, I think this is it. Chris. Oh. I have to write down the people who have.
Yeah. And I've got, I wrote some of that down too.
Okay. So I have Chris Gillo.
Right.
Can I ask a quick question while we're sort of waiting? Because I don't think it's critical, but I'm just curious. So I thought it might be okay. Why did Evanston get its own allocation of these home ARP funds when it sounds like no one else in the county did, if I'm understanding it correctly?
We are the only suburb in Cook County that gets home. So every home entitlement community got a home ARP.
We are the only suburb in Cook County that meets the eligibility requirements to get home funding.
Yes.
And
Yes.
okay, so that's a little different. Okay.
And Cook County got an enormous amount of home ARP, something like 39 million or something like that. I mean, it was huge.
Okay.
And the state got a lot too. So we probably got about the smallest allocation in the entire state.
So that might be good context, just because the way I read it, I was like, well, whoa, that puts a lot of pressure on Evanston. If we have an extra pot of money, like, holy cow, there wasn't that, just there wasn't that context.
Yeah.
And so what it really amounts to is we can basically do very little of the eligible uses without partnering with Cook County or the state or some other source of funding.
Yeah.
So that is,
Not a lot.
but those sources have also prioritized shelter for use of their home ARP.
Right.
Anna has spent a great deal of time tracking all this stuff down.
And for
Going
example,
on in the corner of the screen, yeah.
Can Evanston apply to Cook County for additional support for the non-congregate housing then?
What I expect would happen is what usually happens, like as we would with a tax credit project or something, we would layer our funding. So when an eligible project
Mhm.
for the county and the city of Evanston or the state of Illinois, the applicant would apply to all of them, and that would be how normally that would be done.
Okay, so it'd be up to the applicant rather than Evanston.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
We can't shift money between like government recipients. So,
Okay.
But the other funny thing about his home, and I'm not sure that home ARP has this regulation, but it could very well. We are supposed to use our home dollars in our community because that's why we get it.
Mhm.
But if we do a home collaborative project with the county or the state, we can fund a project that meets both of our needs, even if it is not in our community. So for example, if we were unable to get a shelter location in Evanston, but there were one in Skokie
Mhm.
and Cook County, and we decided to fund it and Skokie approved it,
Mhm.
then that could be allowable. I'm
Mhm.
not saying that's a recommendation that we go and do that, seek it out, but I mean, that's one of the challenges of small amounts of home.
Yeah, right.
It's
Well,
just like,
a small amount given the need.
exactly, and given the very specific definitions of what you have to do, because if
Mhm.
we were to do units, whether it's acquisition and rehab of units as
Yeah.
affordable to homeless people, basically was what it amounts to, or new unit development, you not only have to fund the development of the unit, but then you have to be able to provide a 15-year operating support
Wow.
so that people with virtually no income or very low income would be able to afford to live there.
Right.
And
You can't
a
do that.
really back of the envelope, if you say $1,500 a month
Mhm.
for 12 months, for 15 years,
Mhm.
and that's current dollars, that's $270,000 per unit for an
Mhm.
operating subsidy. So you see why we're not pursuing that.
Right.
It's really, again, we'd have to layer it in with
Mhm.
a much bigger project, or we'd have one or two random units sitting in the middle of nowhere,
Right.
um,
Yeah. Right, yeah, great.
not really addressing much of the need.
Well, this is
Chairman,
all, yeah, Anna?
oh, sorry. Oh, no, it's Lauren. I just,
Oh, Lauren, I'm
I
sorry.
haven't met Juan.
Yeah, well, I was about to have us do introductions.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if everyone else did because I was
No,
going.
no.
Okay.
So that was all very interesting background, but let's get
Let's get to the meeting.
started. Let's start with introductions. Because Councilmember Nusma has left us to join the Environment Board, and Juan Heracales has agreed to take his council member seat. So Juan, you want to say a couple words about yourself?
Sure. My name is Juan Heracales. My pronouns are he, him, his, L. I'm no longer the newest member of the city council, but I represent the 9th Ward. And affordable housing is one of my top priorities, and I'm glad that I was able to get a seat on this committee and look forward to working with all of you.
Great. Oh, welcome, Juan. I'm going to go across the rows here and ask people to introduce themselves. Ugo, can you introduce yourself?
Sorry about that. Hugo Rodriguez. I am a resident of Evanston for about 20 years. I live in the 8th Ward, and I have been a member of this committee since its inception, about a year or so ago, I believe. And I also have a very high interest in affordable housing for the city of Evanston.
Great. Yeah. Okay, Monica.
Monica Bobo. I live in downtown Evanston for a handful of years now. I work for the Illinois Housing Development Authority. more commonly referred to as IDA. So I deal with many of the same HUD headaches and confusions that Sarah and Anna and the rest of their team deal with, and a few more that come from the state and the IRS for tax credits. But affordable housing is passion and career. So
Right, okay. Lauren.
Sure, my name is Lauren Berlin. Been in Evanston about 8 years. Until the summer was a resident of the 5th ward, but we moved this summer. I don't know what our new ward is, but my youngest is now at Dewey, so whatever ward Dewey is. If that, they don't always go that way. Anyways, so yeah, I have a background in affordable housing finance, in mortgage loans to the secondary mortgage market, with selling them to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and really believe strongly in affordable housing. And think it's important. And I represent just a resident of the town.
Great. Kathy?
Hi there. My name is Kathy Feingold, and I've been a resident of Evanston for a little over 4 years. My background for the past 20 or so years, I've worked for both the public sector, City of Chicago, but mostly worked in community development lending for several community development financial institutions, as well as Bank of America and their community development lending. I currently work for Local Initiative Support Corporation, LISC, in their rural team as their director of lending. Have at least 9 years experience with affordable housing lending and finance. So also very interested in, you know, the grants and everything that we talk about on this committee.
Great, great. And Joanne, are you there? She's taking a break. We'll get her introduction in a minute then. And you know, Councilmember Burns. So, okay.
Oh, no, now I'm on mute.
Joanne, hi. And you-
Sorry. Okay, so I've lived in Evanston 44 years. I've lived in the 6th ward, the 3rd ward, and now I live in the 2nd ward. I'm a realtor with Berkshire Hathaway, so I'm interested in housing and everything. I was on the Housing Commission 10 years ago or so. I don't remember the exact years, but got to know Sarah then. So, probably like from 2009 to 13 or something like that. The years go by too fast. So yeah, so I'm certainly interested in affordable housing and, you know, the community. I do own a 2-flat in Evanston. I did have Section 8 tenants at one time. I don't have any now, but anyway, so.
Great. So as you see, we have a lot of expertise and strong passion for affordable housing in this group, and we're delighted to have you joining us, Juan. I'm calling us to order and declaring a quorum and asking someone to make a motion to suspend the rules to allow us to meet to participate remotely.
So moved.
And a second, please.
Second.
Okay, and then a quick roll call.
Chair Revel,
Here, aye.
Hugo Rodriguez,
Aye.
Monica Bobo,
aye.
Lauren Berlin,
Aye.
Councilmember Heracariz,
Aye.
Joanne Salome,
Aye.
Kathy Feingold,
Aye.
and Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. And if someone would make a motion to approve the minutes of our last meeting on October 16th,
So moved.
and a second.
Second.
Okay. And a quick roll call.
Chair Revel,
Aye.
Hugo Rodriguez,
Aye.
Monica Bobo,
Aye.
Lauren Berlin,
Aye.
Councilmember Heracariz,
I wasn't here, so I'll recuse myself on that one.
Joanne Salome,
Aye.
Kathy Feingold,
Aye.
and Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes.
Okay, great. So now we're going to we'll have public comment now to hear from anyone who wants to talk to us about the home ARP allocation plan. And then we'll have our regular public comment on other issues at the end of the meeting. So Anna, are you keeping track of who's here, and is anybody interested in public comment?
Yes, if you could please raise your hand and I can start calling on people as they raise their hands. Okay, we have our first speaker, which is someone from the Suburban Cook County Alliance to End Homelessness. So I will promote them to panelists and allow them to speak.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I hope I did that right. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks. Go ahead.
Hi. Hi. So, hi, committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. My name is Katie Egan. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Continuum of Care Planning Director at the Alliance to End Homelessness in Suburbanica County. We at the Alliance are designated by HUD as the lead agency for the Cook County Continuum of Care. We use the abbreviation COC, which you might see through your packet today. COC standing for Continuum of Care. So our assigned geography as the lead agency for the COC includes all 130 Cook County suburbs located outside the city of Chicago, which of course includes Evanston. So as the lead agency for the Cook County COC, we are responsible for leading a coordinated, comprehensive, community-wide homeless response system and providing the framework for housing interventions and services that are provided to people who are experiencing homelessness, regardless of where they may be located across the suburbs of Cook County. We are also responsible for leading our regional planning efforts for the effective, efficient, and equitable distribution of public resources that are dedicated to serving people experiencing homelessness and those who are at risk of experiencing homelessness. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I really want to thank Anna and Sarah and their team for the thoughtful consultation that's been done with us as the COC, the Coalition to End Homelessness, and Evanston, homeless service providers and domestic violence service providers, all that consultation that has gone in to inform this home ARP allocation plan that's before you all tonight. I'm here to share my support of the home ARP allocation plan and specifically the $1 million of home ARP funding that is being proposed for the acquisition and development of non-congregate shelter. We talked about this when I was on your meeting in July, but this home ARP funding is one-time funding through the American Rescue Plan Act. It is a source that's explicitly designed to help communities provide emergency housing for people experiencing homelessness. And it represents an extremely rare opportunity to have capital funding that's explicitly can be used for the acquisition and rehab of non-congregate shelter. And this opportunity comes at a really critical time when we are rebuilding our suburban Cook County emergency shelter system. So prior to the pandemic, our suburban Cook County emergency shelter response relied primarily on donated spaces in places of worship. It provided rotating seasonal emergency shelter to those who were in crisis. This model relied heavily on volunteers. It typically included dinner and a cot on the floor to sleep overnight. This type of shelter represented 70% of the emergency shelter capacity across all of suburban Cook County. When the pandemic began, this type of shelter disappeared. We lost this entirely. We could no longer rely on the donated congregate spaces that were being provided by these places of worship. We could no longer rely on the volunteers. It was not safe for the health and safety of the volunteers, for staff, and for the participants to be in this type of congregate setting. So we had homeless service providers located across our region, across suburban Cook County, who quickly transitioned to set up agreements with hotels or other types of non-congregate shelter options to be able to provide hotel-based shelter, non-congregate-based shelter to people in crisis. And so over the course of the past 2.5 years or so, these homeless service providers have continued to serve about 600 people a night in hotel-based emergency shelter. So like I said, this prior type of shelter represented 70% of how we were able to meet folks in crisis who needed a place to stay overnight. We lost such a significant portion of our prior emergency shelter capacity. And we have been working over the course of the last 2.5 years in partnership with homeless service providers, with municipalities, with the county, and with the state decision makers to rebuild and to create a more resilient shelter system to serve people in crisis. And so to help us with our roadmap of what does this look like to create a more resilient emergency shelter response, we engaged a consulting firm who helped us to really inform target numbers of what does this look like across suburban Cook County to be able to have the right number of beds in each community to be able to serve people in crisis. And then ultimately, once folks have a safe and stable place to go in crisis, being able to provide the intensive supportive services needed to transition someone out of that experience of homelessness and into their own safe and stable housing. So as reflected in your materials and in the packet and in the consultation, in the north suburbs, which includes Evanston, we are working towards at least 185 emergency shelter beds that would be available every night to serve individuals and families who are experiencing an emergency housing crisis. And this allocation of $1 million in home ARP is critical to acquiring and developing the non-congregate shelter that's needed to be able to get us closer to that goal. As outlined in the packet, this $1 million would go towards helping to acquire non-congregate shelter that would provide an estimated 65 beds of emergency shelter. And that is a really critical piece of how we meet this ultimate goal of 185 beds across the north suburbs on any given night. So I just want to emphasize again that this is a critical, extremely rare opportunity to use home ARP funds for capital and acquisition, or for capital costs that can be used to acquire and rehab non-congregate shelter facilities. This is a stated and explicit eligible activity for home ARP funding. And this represents our largest unmet need for the suburban Cook County homeless response system. So I just want to thank the team again for their thoughtful consultation process with stakeholders across the homelessness sector that have gone into creating this home ARP allocation plan, and am here in support of the particularly the $1 million proposed allocation for the acquisition and rehab of non-congregate shelter.
Great, great. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, and we have one more person. I believe it's Tina. And I will give her access to speak now.
Hi, Tina.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. In light of the immigrants that are coming in, is there any money designated for those persons? And are any of those persons that are coming in, are they coming into Evanston? And will they be at the Margarita or any other shelter? And are we designating any money for that? And then just the last one, I would just like to mention that there is a homeless man, or I believe to be homeless, at Emerson and Ridge, and he plays a guitar. And about 2 weeks, he's been sleeping under the viaduct, and he's also at Emerson and Benson as well. But I just wanted to know, are we doing any, as do we plan on having the immigrants come to Evanston? And then what are we doing for our current homeless people before anyone else comes? Thank you.
So I don't know, Sarah, do you want to respond? I mean, the home ARP money doesn't specify anything about immigrants, right?
You're muted.
Home ARP is not allocated specifically for use to address the needs of immigrants. So it isn't coming into play for that. To my knowledge, at this time, there are no immigrants that are on this particular wave, these waves that have been being sent to the Chicago area in Evanston. The state of Illinois has reached out to try to any number of parts of the suburbs and in Chicago, of course, to try to look for places to house them and have funding. We have not, as of this time, identified any place that we have in Evanston to fund them, to put them. For example, they're looking for hotels that can take them on. Northwestern has home football games for the next 2 weekends, and you can bet that they're pretty booked up. So, I mean, we don't even have the capacity that we would currently have. Frankly, the Margarita Inn is full, and even if it were to, be an eligible use, not with home ARP, they have a wait list for people who have been homeless in the community for some time that are prioritized. So as of this time, we have none of them in Evanston that we are aware of. We've been, as I say, we've been asked by the state to let them know if there are any places we can find to put them. We are working on that, but have not located anything yet. And so, and home ARP is not designated for this purpose. So it would not apply to, home ARP would not be applied for it to it.
Yeah.
Well, so my question is too, so if the Connections for the Homeless acquires the Margarita, will it be available for anyone to come in? Do you know the capacity right now? Is it full, or is there, what's happening with that?
It's full and there's a wait list.
It's a wait list, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Councilmember Harakaris, you had a comment?
So at our last regular city council meeting, Councilmember Reed proposed bringing forward a refugee resettlement fund proposal at our next regularly scheduled city council meeting. So if it's not at our next one, I think sometime early October, we will be having a vote on allocating some funds specifically for refugee resettlement.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Anna, is anybody else raising their hands in the audience?
No one else has raised their hands.
There is a question on the question and answers.
Oops, okay, thanks.
So it's a question.
I can address this.
From D. Dirks.
Yeah.
And it says, the money is to purchase the Margarita Inn. Is there a budget for maintenance of this old building? And will the city have an equity stake in the building?
Councilmember Revelle, would you, Chair Revelle, would you like me to address that?
Yes.
Or I would also like to make sure that we, even though they're not here physically at the meeting, that before we get into too much discussion, that we acknowledge the people who emailed in.
Right, yeah. Would you, well, you could address that question as part of the conversation, because I think that does need clarifying as to exactly what the wording of the allocation is. So, yeah, so let's first acknowledge the emails that we received.
And I don't have them in, well, I can try to put them in time order that I received them. We'll do that first.
Okay.
We received a petition in support of the Margarita Inn and Connections from Interfaith Action. And it has, and they are expressing support for Connections and the purchase of the Margarita Inn and that whole thing. That does not directly address what we are asking approval for tonight, because the allocation plan is not location specific.
Right.
But I just wanted to note that there was that was sent in, and there was a petition with a number of signatures. I haven't counted them.
600 signatures.
Several hundred, yes, it's a substantial number in support. We also received an email that has two different residents on it. One is Christillo and one is Nafrit Halim, with questions about the what is being approved. One of the concerns is that this is actual moving forward with funding a specific shelter location, the Margarita Inn, which it is not. And so the question of the mayor also specifically mentioned 5 options, one of which was to keep the shelter but find a different provider. As I say, this is provider, not non-specific. And before the city would be able to actually allocate funding for a shelter, any shelter, it would have to prove all the things you have to prove to get funding. It would have to prove site control, zoning approval, and the ability to move forward. Because the city of Evanston's $1 million is a very small portion of what any shelter will cost for acquisition and rehab. It will also require funding from other sources. Both the state of Illinois and Cook County have prioritized shelter, non-congregate shelter in their home ARP plans. So our intent as a community is to try to work with those other funders to get non-congregate shelter in Evanston and the north suburbs. Ideally, Evanston would always want to spend its funding in Evanston when possible, because that's why we get our own funding. But we are also allowed to layer our funding with other funding in another community with an agreement that it will serve our community needs as well. So those are all options which we will look at. We can't act on funding any shelter until there is a project that has those requirements: site control, zoning approval, and other sources of funding for us to move forward.
Right, great.
However, we aren't able to act on any use of home ARP without getting an approved allocation plan.
Right.
So
that's step number 1.
So that's step number 1.
Right.
So that is one of the questions that was in that.
Okay. And then Laura,
and I think
Lauren has her hand up. Can I see if that's before we go on? Lauren, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a quick question that may have just gotten answered, but like Ugo, I found it a bit hard to get through the entirety of the details. So I just want to be very clear. So is the fundamental task in front of us in the near term, putting aside the questions of the Margarita Inn and should this be in Evanston or not in Evanston, is just the fundamental task to work towards some sort of to approve this plan that's fundamentally like, yes, we want to commit to using this 1.2 million towards non-congregate shelter in some shape or form, like regardless of the details, which are TBD. Is that what we're trying to determine right now? Do we want to take the money? Is it sort of like, do we want to take the money or not take the money?
Yes, until we get an approved allocation plan, we will not have formal access to our funding. If we are unable to use the funding the way we are intended, we will have to modify that allocation plan, just as if we allocate something for Cdbg and then we don't use it, we have to amend our plan. In addition to the shelter, we've allocated some funding for tenant-based rental assistance, and that is based on how effectively we've been able to use funding of this sort to help move people out of shelter and into more permanent housing. And one of the ways, because again, it has to be targeted at people who are homeless or coming out of a homeless shelter. In other words, they are either have been homeless and are being placed in housing, or are at high risk of becoming homeless because they are in the process of losing their housing. They have to meet the definition of eligible populations, qualifying populations that is in the home ARP regulations. And so we have put money into those two things, and then there's also money for administering the program.
So then, at the risk of sounding ill-informed, and I apologize, I'm catching up to speed a little bit because I was out this summer. Is there a vote in front of us this evening on approving this plan, or is this our edification?
This would, we're asking that this committee approve the plan. It would then go on to city council for its approval. And then we
to be clear,
send it off to HUD.
Yeah, got
again.
it. I'm with you.
So-
It just feels like there's been a lot of tentacles in the conversation.
Yeah,
right.
It is not a simple process.
Right, right.
And frankly, the requirements for consultation and everything were incredibly rigorous because of the focus of the funding and HUD's desire to make sure that it is focused on these eligible uses. So the city manager has recently sent information to some residents about the process for the Margarita Inn to go forward. This is not directly involved with that at all. If the Margarita Inn were to be approved, then the question would be, can they get the other funding? And would it then proceed from there? But we are not at this time funding a specific application, a specific location, or even technically a specific number of units or beds. In our allocation plan, we looked at the number of beds that are currently in our community, and we know if the Margarita Inn were to cease to exist there, that's the number of units we're trying to make sure we maintain. We don't want to go backwards. We have the most capacity right now that we've ever had for shelter. We have had expanding our shelter capacity in our consolidated plans at least since 2010, which is the first consolidated plan I was responsible for helping write in this community. It is a very large need because until you have people who are homeless in a stable living situation, they are rarely able to move forward and address their other needs, and that will get them out of homelessness and able to,
Housing first.
Housing first.
Right, okay. So Sarah, do you want to tell us who else we've heard from?
So Chris Dillo and Nafreet Halim were in that one email, and then also John Cleve sent an email and had similar concerns about this being funding specifically
Right,
the Margarita Inn.
right.
There are two more questions.
And I'll just mention one more person. We got an email from, from the Moran Center. And their board had also voted to basically approve the plan.
In support of it, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, yeah, Anna, go
Thank
ahead
you.
with the questions.
The next question is from Tina Payton, and she asks, how much is the price to purchase the Margarita? And she has also raised her hand, so I don't know if she wants to ask her question.
I think if she'd put her questions in the chat, that would be great.
Okay.
We don't know
Right.
the purchase price for the Margarita Inn.
Right, yeah, so that's really not our topic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are there other?
And Diana Dirks asks, I understand that your org works with all suburban Cook County municipalities. I'm asking which ones you're currently working with to secure beds and housing. And I believe this is a question for the Suburban Cook County Alliance.
Hmm.
So I can allow.
Chair Rebel, would you like to allow Katie to answer that? I can let you know that I know of at least one, and that is in the Oak Park area. But the goal, I know that the Alliance is working in the south suburbs and the west suburbs, and probably even in other parts of the north suburbs. So really, if you are willing to let Katie speak, she can address that better than I can.
Oh, okay, is Katie still in the audience there, Anna? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, she is.
Okay.
Hi, I think the question was what other communities we're working with across Suburbanica County. Is that right? Can you
Yes, that is.
for me? Yes. So yeah, like I mentioned before, this is not just a Evanston or North Suburban specific issue. We are rebuilding our entire emergency shelter system across all of suburban Cook County. The 70% of our emergency shelter system that we lost reflects the overall capacity across our entire region of suburban Cook County. So we are working with about 6 partners across the suburbs to develop about 550 new units of shelter to be able to meet our target of what's needed across suburban Cook County for crisis housing. And so that includes Oak Park, like Sarah had mentioned, which is where one of the agencies is located, also in the Summit area, also in the northwest suburbs, in the Palatine area, and then also in the south suburbs in the Chicago Heights area. All of those agencies are at various points in terms of actually identifying sites and moving forward, but the need for increased shelter beds is across our entire suburban region.
Right, yeah, great, thank you.
Yeah.
So where are we? Do we have any more questions, Anna?
Tina still has her hand up. Tina, do you want to put your question in the Q&A or would you like to speak?
Because we're really trying to move into our conversation about the plan here.
Yeah.
Okay.
She would like to speak.
Okay, one more question.
Hello, yeah. So it was kind of complicated. That's why I wanted to ask. So I'm confused because in the packet, it looks like, I'm not saying I'm for or against anything. I'm just asking questions. So it looks like that Connections would be receiving the $1.3 million based on the appearance of the packet. Now you're saying in the conversation that's not true, and you're just approving an acquisition of a property. And so are you saying that that might not occur in Evanston and you're just approving some money that may be not here? Or it doesn't look clear of who's asking for, who made this request. So was it the city of Evanston staff people said, hey, we want to use all this money for one entity as opposed to spread it around? And am I missing something in the packet where it looks like this is for Tibra TBRA is generally associated with connections, and or are you saying it's going somewhere else? And you said an acquisition of a property, but you're saying not the Margarita. So I would really like to see if you could explain this a little better as what this is proposing here.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically, the city has this money that we have been allocated. And we have very specific guidelines about the kinds of projects that we can spend the money on. And through this big consultation process that staff has gone through with a variety of organizations, they've really come to the conclusion that the biggest unmet need for our area is non-congregate shelter. And so we are, and that fits into that's eligible for spending that money from HUD. So what we're being asked to do tonight is say, yes, we agree, we would like to dedicate $1 million of that money towards eventually a non-congregate shelter project. Unknown at this point. I mean, is Connections going to be successful in obtaining a special use permit and raising the funds to purchase the Margarita Inn? I mean, that's all into the future and down the road. But in the meantime, our task tonight is to decide whether, yes, we want to dedicate that $1 million towards, at some point, a non-congregate shelter project. We hope it'll be, if it's not in Evanston directly, we want it to be in a community nearby where it would serve Evanston residents. That's about as best I can explain it.
So is the TBRA money, is that being specifically allocated to Connections, or is that for anybody up for grabs as well?
Sarah, are other groups?
That would not, it is not allocated, it is not being allocated. Again, it is, I mean, to anyone at this point, to any provider. It would, anyone who wished to apply for those TBRA funds would have to be able to manage the TBRA program, which is a significant program to manage, as I believe you know, Tina. It requires, the funding is for housing. It is, and people get a subsidized lease, but it has all the requirements of being able to handle monthly rent payments and, in other words, be able to.
Right. I know.
And so it is not,
was confused.
we're not allocating it to any provider.
Okay. All right.
We do not currently have anybody else that has ever applied for TBRA in the Evanston area.
All right. Well, I'm not saying yes or no, because as you know, I've taken TBRA for many years since the inception. So I just wanted to know, because it looks confusing in the packet that you were designating all money to a certain entity, and not just that you're approving something, or that you decided you want to use all the money for these things, and then it's open for someone to apply. It didn't look like that in the packet. I'm just letting you know.
Okay.
So
great.
thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So Anna, any more issues for us?
Yes, we have a question from Diana Dirks, and she asks, attributed to COVID in your packet, non-congregate shelters do not require occupants to sign a lease or occupancy agreement. Do you see this policy changing if the city invests in a homeless facility?
Homeless facilities do not have leases. I'm not familiar with any, it isn't a function of a homeless shelter. So we would not require leases for investing in a homeless shelter.
And Council Member Kelly asks, who are the sponsors of this referral to allocate $1 million for this acquisition?
There are no sponsors for this referral. The allocation plan is a requirement of HUD for the funding. So it is not, it is like the consolidated plan and the action plans. It does not require a referral in order to act on it. It is required for us to follow these procedures in order to get access to the funding. Should the city choose to decline to accept the funding, we wouldn't be doing these. Staff would not recommend that.
Right, right. So are we?
And Chair, quickly, if I may.
Sure.
I just want to say also, because I'm constantly reminding everyone about this, that referrals committee is policy changes, and it's not about, we don't have to do a referral for every expenditure, especially a one-time expenditure or grant, or it's only for policy changes.
Right.
Just to make that clear. So this wouldn't even require,
Right.
wouldn't need to be required to go through the referrals process.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah, that's a good point. It generally, a referral ends up being leads to an ordinance change or something like that. So, okay. So I think at this point, I'd like to turn it over to the committee for discussion about the plan. I hope it's clearer now for everybody that it's, it's a kind of an open-ended allocation for funding for a non-congregate shelter project. So I turn it over to, whoops.
Chair Revel, I can actually share my screen.
Oh, good. Okay.
We have a very few slides that we can go through very quickly.
Excellent.
Kind of.
Excellent.
Please let me know if you can see it.
Yeah, we can see that. I can.
Yeah, can see it. We're good.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so this is just, I know we've talked a lot about the HOMARP allocation plan, but these are just some of the key points. So as you know, the city got close to $1.3 million in Home American Rescue Plan Act funds. We have an expenditure date of September of 2030. And we did a very rigorous consultation with the Coalition to End Homelessness in Evanston. And we attended a meeting on July 27th with the full coalition. Prior to that, Sarah had been in contact and in constant meetings with the coalition to gather their input, and also with the Alliance to End Homelessness in suburban Cook County, which acts as the Continuum of Care entity. So through this consultation process that we undertook, two main themes came out of this consultation. That was that they supported not congregate shelter. And this trend was not just in Evanston or in the region, but state and countrywide. Shelter beds have been diminishing, and also the continued need for tenant-based rental assistance. So in order to submit the HOMARP allocation plan, we had to do a needs assessment for all of the qualifying populations. So homeless, at risk, and domestic violence survivors. So for homeless and at risk of becoming homeless, the current shelter inventory is fully occupied. So additional needs are 17 units or 50 beds for families of three or plus members, and then 56 beds and or units for individuals. And for families at risk of becoming homeless, there are 760 more households than units available for households from 0 to 50 AMI. and an additional 161 households on the centralized wait list for 50% units. So this brings the additional need for at risk of becoming homeless to 921 units. So that is huge.
Right.
Additionally, for people experiencing homelessness, which are also fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence situations, all of the beds are also occupied on a nightly basis. And the YWCA, sorry, my computer's a little finicky. The YWCA has a total of 58 shelter beds. So there's a nightly deficit of 2 units or 2 beds for these domestic violence survivors. So this is just reiterating the proposed use of HomeARP funding, which is $1 million for HomeARP towards the acquisition of and development of non-congregate shelter, $150,000 towards tenant-based rental assistance, and $148,584 in administration and planning, which is 11% per the grant guidelines. So that is
So technically, just a real quick note, technically, the maximum allocation for admin and planning is 15%. We don't believe we will need that much, and frankly, depending on what we do, we may not need the full 148,000 that we've allocated there. And as we sometimes have done before, that would then go into one of the other uses. But there was a question that somebody had asked that we didn't answer, and that was what were the what about operating support if for a homeless shelter? And I wanted to make that clear. Home ARP funds cannot be used for operating support of a homeless shelter. They can only be used for acquisition and rehab, or you could actually build one from scratch if you had the money to do that in a location. But so any allocation the city would actually make would include an evaluation of where they were going to get the operating funds to maintain that, because that would not be done with home ARP. It is not an eligible use. I did want to point out that the need for affordable housing units for very low income residents is very large in Evanston. And home ARP does not direct, could be used to address that, but the requirements are not only do you have to develop the units, so you have the cost of acquisition and rehab or of building, you have to be able to provide operating support for a minimum of 15 years for a population that is homeless or at risk of homelessness, which generally means you have to have the equivalent of a housing choice voucher or a project-based voucher type of operating support, which would require a conservative requirement in Evanston for that over a 15-year period would be in $270,000 per unit. Wow. So if you look at the $1.3 million and try to parse out how many units you would be able to develop and maintain at that, you have very few. And that is when you would need all your administration, because you would have to be assuring that the properties were maintained for that use and that the people put in it over that many years were income eligible and all that stuff. So it is a formula that does not really work with our amount of funding.
Right, okay. So we have a couple of comments from our committee. Ugo, you want to go first?
Mute. It's great to hear what you just said, Sarah. I think that it's important that if that were to be that somebody decides to develop units, that it has supervision long enough to make sure that that is what really the city will get in return for the investment. But I have a question, because I'm still a little confused about what we're about to approve today. Is a plan that really has no form yet, but when that particular form comes to be, we're going to need to come in and amend a plan that has no form. Is that kind of what we're doing today, Sarah?
We wouldn't amend it. What we would do is, if approved by the committee, this would go to city council for their approval and then be sent to HUD. Then we would work in the community and remain connected with our different providers and the Alliance and Cook County and the state of Illinois to figure out a location that we could ultimately put our funding into for a shelter. And if we are unable to find a location and unable to figure out a way to use it that way, then we would have to go back to HUD and amend our allocation plan, just as we sometimes amend our action plans. And find another use. Now, that's difficult, as I said, because of if we were to try to do units, that would be a very small number of units and a great deal of monitoring and expenditure that would help relatively few households or individuals. So, and also does not meet the highest needs as identified through this consultation. But if we are unable to ever figure out a shelter that would work, and as Councilmember Revel said, it is not absolutely required that it be in Evanston, we would have to amend that plan, or we would have to give the money back to the federal government, which I would hate to see us end up doing. We have a lot of needs to address, and I think we can figure out a way to use this money effectively.
But Sarah, when it comes time to actually spending the $1 million, that'll require another whole vote.
It will, because we would have to vote, it would come first to this committee. And we as staff would want to be able to show to you that the rest of the dollars necessary for the acquisition and rehab are available from other sources. And as I say, that the site is, they have site, whoever it is, has site control, has zoning approval and all the things necessary so it could move forward. And also an operating plan of how they would get their operating revenue. So it would be like when we approve a specific home housing project with a development budget and an operating pro forma. And then this committee would review it and make its recommendation to city council, and then city council would approve it, would have to approve it before it would be actually allocated to anybody.
So
thank you very much. Much clearer now. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, Lauren.
Yeah, and I know we are trying not to discuss the Margarita Inn. That's not what's on the table. So I really don't want to go back down there, but please bear with me. I have one question, which is, are there other ideas on the table currently? I don't need you to discuss if they're good or bad or viable or not, but there's so much assumption that this basically channels into the Margarita project that I'm just curious to know if there are other things on the horizon. It sounds like we have a 7-year time frame based on that number in the presentation of 2030, but it can even just be yes or no.
Not other locations that are currently under consideration in Evanston that I am aware of.
Okay, in all of Cook County, in our partner.
Oh, there are others in Cook County. I think that, Katie gave us some of those. The challenge right now is the closest one is pretty far away. I mean, Palatine we're gonna have a hard time
Yeah, no, you're right. Sorry, I
It's not
didn't.
feasible.
Yeah, no, you're right. Okay, thank you. I was
Mhm.
just. Yeah.
Good question, though. Joanne, do you have a question?
Yeah, so no other community on the North Shore, and I'm thinking mainly of the suburbs west of us that border the city, more than further north, I suppose, have a shelter? Are we the only, where would the next closest shelter be in the Cook County suburb? Oak Park?
There is a shelter, I cannot remember, I mean, it's in Arlington Heights, I believe. I mean, there are shelters. I don't know what non-congregate shelters had been opened up in the northwest suburbs. There have been other shelter operations, but they are the kind that went out of business in essence. They are the PADS type shelters. The north suburbs, the entire suburban Cook County has had very few designated shelters. Most of them are the PAD system, where churches or faith-based organizations provide space, and you line up at the door, you come in for the night, you're generally given a meal, you leave in the morning, and you have to go someplace else.
Yeah.
Wow, that's stunning.
Yeah. Kathy?
That's why shelters are such a high priority on
Yeah,
all these plans.
You can also see why that is being why this is being equated basically with the Margarita project in some people's eyes, based
Sure.
based on the landscape in this community, just honestly, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So Kathy, you have a question?
Yeah, so say this request passes this committee, passes city council, gets approved by HUD. The staff work with the community at coming up with a feasible location, and I'm not saying anything about Margarita Inn, but say we find that there's a viable project in Skokie. Does anything have to happen at the local level in order to utilize these funds outside of our jurisdiction?
There's a necessary RFP that has to happen after everything has been approved. And that will be open to anyone in the city of Evanston or any entity in the city of Evanston that provides shelter services or would like to.
And it could also be open to organizations that are putting shelters near enough to Evanston and that would agree to an operating agreement. But again, they have to come with a proposal with all the other sources of funding and the location approved and all the same things. So it's kind of the same process. It's just, I'm not aware of any that are.
I was just
nearby.
wondering if there is anything the city council has to do, or anything if we're going to utilize our funds to fund a project outside of the boundaries of Evanston.
We would just have to be able to assure HUD that our population would benefit from
Yes,
that.
sir.
And I do not believe, I would have to double check, with regular home, you can to layer funding with Cook County or the state of Illinois. You had to do a collaborative home project. I don't believe they have that restriction. It could be layered with other funding. For example, a community could use its regular ARPA funding for this same type of need.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Burns, you had your hand up for a minute.
Yeah, and I just wanted to quickly say, and please everyone that works in housing generally, but more so, I guess, more specifically with homeless populations, I would put homeless, our homeless population as well as returning incarcerated members of our community in a similar boat, in that I think these, unless they're panhandling and, quote unquote, in the way, society has largely made them invisible. And so before COVID, there hasn't been a lot of, funding to build new shelters. And even the one in Oak Park is fairly new. Housing Forward, which maintains that shelter, has only been there since COVID and has a similar history as Connections does. So I just want to remind us that there's been this kind of this renewed focus on not only supporting our those who are homeless, who have been placed in homelessness, but also I think a renewed effort and focus on helping those who have mental health care needs since COVID. And I think that also is why we're having this discussion and why more funding is available.
Right. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Joanne, a question or comment?
Yeah, I was wondering, since the survey or the report here says that the YWCA is short 2 beds. Do you have any idea if they have the interest or capacity to add 2 more with some of these funds?
I think it's really an analysis of our area is short 2 beds. Adding 2 beds to a shelter might not be a feasible thing. The other thing that is important to realize is one of the requirements we would have to put on a non-congregate shelter that we fund is that that any of the populations aren't going to be excluded. That was one of the things that we are required to do. So people fleeing domestic violence have to be eligible for a non-congregate shelter that we fund, whether it is officially a domestic violence shelter or a shelter that serves a broader population. So those, and remember that this is a kind of point in time. So that's the estimate of any number needed at any given time. And so it's impossible to say that if you had that exact number that everybody would always be taken care of at that time. One of the challenges of trying to quantify the need.
Right, yeah. So I don't see any other hands at the moment. Would someone like to make a motion that that the committee recommend approval of the home ARP allocation plan?
I will move approval of the home allocation ARP plan. And I'm sorry, I'm listed as Councilmember Burns. This is not.
Confused. How did that happen?
I think Councilmember Burns sent me the link, and so when I clicked it, I logged in as him as opposed to myself.
Okay, I wondered why we had 2 Councilmember Burns.
I just changed your name.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Councilmember Reed moves that we recommend approval of the allocation plan to City Council. Is there a second?
Second.
I will second.
Okay.
I don't know who got there first.
Is there? Yeah. Is there? What? Is there any? I was just going to ask if there's any further comments or before we take a vote.
Diana Dirks asked if would the city require an occupancy agreement, which is different from a lease.
I think that's outside the scope of this discussion.
And Tina Payton asks, do you have to stick with acquisition or can you say preservation or expansion?
I think whatever would get us more beds. So
Just say rehabilitation.
You could rehab something in order, to basically we want to create a space for, a generous number of new non-congregate beds. Okay, Councilmember Reed.
Just as we're closing this out, I do want to just highlight that there are, possibilities in the 8th ward particularly I think along Howard, you know, for the acquisition and potential placement of a new shelter. So I just want to put that out there and volunteer or just highlight that I think 8th Warders, you know, particularly in the right location with the right program, would be welcoming to some kind of future project. Just throwing that out there.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, we'll take note of that, that's for sure. Okay, any other comments or questions before we vote on our motion?
Diana Dirks asked, will these funds require accepting any homeless person, even sex offenders?
That's an issue for the organization running the shelter. It's not tied to the funding. The funding is just the funding. Okay. Councilmember Reed, you have a hand up again?
No, I'm sorry. They didn't put it down. Thank you.
Okay. All right, I think we're ready for a roll call on the motion to recommend approval of the home ARP allocation plan to City Council.
Okay, Chair Revelle,
Aye.
Hugo Rodriguez,
Aye.
Monica Bobo,
Aye.
Lauren Berlin,
Aye.
Councilmember Heracariz,
Aye.
Joanne Salome,
Aye.
Kathy Feingold,
Aye.
Councilmember Burns,
Aye.
and Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Our next item is discussion. I think this may have been suggested by Councilmember Reed or Councilmember Burns, that we consider
Yes, the public benefit.
yeah, forgiving CDBG rehab loans rather than requiring repayment at a certain point. So that, do we have a little presentation?
It's just a simple slide.
Okay.
What we are doing, and I'll take you through where we are on it.
Okay.
We've had a discussion about this. We are interested in moving to forgivable loans for 2 reasons. One is that it will help our lower income residents that we are assisting to maintain equity in their homes, which is a key for us with lower income homeowners. Well, that's the primary reason. The challenge is we have historically funded our housing rehab program through the revolving loan fund, which is repayment of those loans. And that has been our primary source of funding. So we looked at what is in our outstanding loan balance in CDBG loans. Now, understand, CDBG loans were first made in the mid 1970s, and we still have some loans on the books that are from the early 80s. We will never recover all of this funding, but we recover a significant part of it. But it's because most of them are deferred, they are unpredictable as when you were going to get the income. So we looked at what kind of income we tend to get year to year. In the last 5 years, we've averaged about $120,000. So we almost always have some balance in our revolving loan fund, but then the repayments come in. So there are certainly years that we have spent well over 120,000. So if we were only to have 120,000 coming in for the next however many years till that would limit our program a great deal. Right at the moment, we have a pretty high balance in our loan fund. It's approximately 350,000 because during the last 2.5 years, we have done very little rehab. And actually right now, our rehab program is not anywhere close to full speed, in part because Community Partners for Affordable Housing had volunteered to help with the reparations recipients, our ancestors who were getting funding to help them manage their projects if they needed assistance. And I believe 14 of the 16 first recipients have requested help from SEPA. So that's been a major focus of SEPA's efforts, which has affected our ability to do our regular CDBG loan program. But that will be resolved as these wrap up, and we're balancing between the two. But if you look at the 350,000, generally we spend someplace in the neighborhood of 40,000 per loan project. And so would likely get 7 to 9 units out of that over the years. Now, one of the things in our partnership with SEPA is that SEPA has secured funding in the past from the Illinois Housing Development Authority. It used to be called its owner-occupied rehab program. It is now a combination of the owner-occupied rehab program and the accessibility program. So it has a different name, but I forget exactly what that is. SEPA has applied for that, and we expect a December funding announcement. It's a renewal application for SEPA, and I believe there's a very good likelihood that they would get funding. But that only would cover owner-occupied rehabs. The income target is exactly the same. The only other difference from CDBG that is a significant thing that we just want to think about is IDA has a restriction. You cannot do you cannot rehab a home that is in a trust. And one of the challenges that gives you, if you have somebody who's put their home in a trust for their own estate planning, which is one of the ways you actually preserve equity and pass it on to your heirs, you can't use that money. We used to have that in our CDBG program. I think almost everybody did at one point, and we removed it because it is a barrier to helping some people, and it's one of those systemic barriers to dealing with the problem of helping lower income people maintain their equity. IDA also does not have a program that is easy to use for very small scale rental rehab. There are lots of different funding programs for affordable rental, but it's difficult to do. Historically, we've done a lot of 2 flats, owner occupied 2 flats and things like that, that wouldn't fall into that. What we would like to recommend is moving to 10-year forgivable loans, CDBG loans, for a pilot beginning in 2023. And I would like to put some kind of time limit on it, just because I really want to see how our other sources come up, but and can we make sure that we can actually, with multiple sources that we're looking at, have a robust rehab program. We also, as you know, are working on the one-stop shop, which is specifically designed to pull in other sources. So we're kind of balancing a lot of different things at this time, trying to figure it out. But as I say, SEPA expects to hear back from IDA in December, and if they get that funding, then we would recommend moving to forgivable loans on a 10-year forgivable loans on CDBG rehab at that time, starting in 2023.
Okay, great. Councilmember Burns, you had your hand up first.
Yeah, just so the loan balance that's the amount of loans we have out that we haven't collected on or that haven't been paid.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then how much do we have a year allocated towards the CDBG loan program, or how does that work on a
Generally, we do not allocate funding for the rehabs. We just allocate, actually, right now, I think we're allocating about 100,000 for the management program, which is for the management and compliance. It both pays Community Partners for Affordable Housing for the construction supervision. They do all the bidding, they do all of the work with the homeowners to define the scope of work, do the bidding. They they have to be, anyone we're working with has to know how to follow HUD's lead requirements, which are significant. We have lead remediation requirements with all Cdbg, all that kind of stuff. But we originally, for many years, we had a rehab specialist on staff. And in 2021, I think it was, we moved to working with SEPA because it was a more effective way, and the actual cost for the construction supervision is lower working with SEPA and their program. And we also then got access to IDA's funding, to which we can direct owner-occupied rehab needs. And we've been working to do that, especially when it allows, because it allows them to be able to have a forgivable loan. So the goal is to get our layered funding to be able to be used on that forgivable loan. Now, it is possible that the city could decide to use more of it.
Before I just don't want to forget this line of thinking. So the 40,000. So currently, how are we funding the revolving or the improvements themselves? Is it through the 40,000 or the $120,000 we get back every 5 years? Are we, as people are making their repayments?
No, each year of the last 5 years, we've gotten approximately $120,000.
Oh, each year. Okay.
Each year. So
And
sorry.
So we're using those funds to make the improvements.
Correct.
Okay. And then how much is there, like an account where that money is, and how much do we have in that account?
That's right around 350 right now.
That's $350 right now.
Because we have a balance that we have not spent, because our rehab program has not been operating at anywhere near full capacity in the last 2.5 years. But we want to pick it back up to that. Historically, we have spent, depending on the volume and everything, someplace in some years we were over 250,000 in a year. So part of what we really need to figure out is more sources. If we're not able to figure out more sources, then it would be something that we would have to look at with this committee to either amend our allocations for housing. One of the things you are also involved in, Councilmember Burns, is looking at can we self-fund our property inspections program, our property maintenance. Right now, we are putting approximately $325,000 a year of Cdbg into portions of our housing code inspection program. And so, that overall program is obviously much more than that 325,000. So these are the balancing acts. We would then have to determine if we could, if it were the choice of the city to use more of our housing dollars or our total Cdbg dollars for housing rehab and take away from some of the other uses. And honestly, I think that certainly I'm hoping 2023 can be kind of a help of a test year. And I think that those are important decisions we really need to look at, certainly by the time we're in 2020. This consolidated plan only goes through 2024. So in we will be working on the next con plan very soon. They go by really quickly, these 5-year periods.
Appreciate it. Yeah, and this was actually I can't call it a referral because it didn't require one at this stage of mine. Councilmember Reed thought you were referring to another item, but I know he's probably equally excited about this. But so wanted to discuss this because I think people, as Sarah explained, have some residents, property owners have some apprehension to participate in the program, and I think one of the hesitations comes from, these are typically older residents who own the property, and they want when their heir or next to kin inherits the property, or the property is transferred over, at whatever point. They want, a fresh start, a clean start, for that member of their family, or that individual. And I think for that and other reasons, there's been a lot of apprehension. So if there's a way to kind of get this money out, quicker, faster, to make the improvements that are desperately needed. And I'm not over kind of stating that it really is, even if you look at the restorative housing program through reparations, out of the three options, the home improvement one is the most utilized at this point. So I think there's a tremendous need for home improvement. So this is good information, Sarah. Thank you. And that's all the questions I have for now.
Okay, well, great, thanks. Okay, Lauren, you have a question?
Yeah, I can actually share a thought more than a question maybe on this. But as thinking about this, I guess it's a question. I'm wondering if there's something of a compromise that's not either 100% payback or 100% forgivable, because being honest, to me, it sounds like we're potentially talking about three separate things. One is, do we make them forgivable or not? Two is, do we potentially wind down the city's program and take the SEPA program instead? And three is, are we addressing needs? And I think depending on that, it's not clear to me that we actually should move programs over to SEPA, and I'll tell you why. If I'm understanding correctly, it sounds like small scale renters aren't eligible if we make this move. I think while preserving affordable homeownership is a huge issue that we should be addressing, we also know there's a huge shortage of affordable rental housing. And it sounds like, based on what you all have said, the majority of people who would be able to take advantage of this as quote unquote multifamily owners are such small properties that this is probably also extremely helpful in that domain as well. So excluding very small scale mom and pop rental concerns me, and frankly excluding properties that are in a trust concerns me as well. I think that there's a lot of data, or there's some data indicating, like, I don't think that trusts are probably the first thing that people in low-income communities are establishing, but that might be a separate thing. We should have a program to encourage people to do that. When my mom died totally out of the blue, her house was not in a trust, and it was an issue. And that's how I learned about trusts, and I wish I'd learned about them a different way. So I'm a little reluctant. I'm also reluctant to make it 100% forgivable, while in my heart, I completely believe in that as a philosophical approach. If we're potentially like, we're in a moment when we know that there is so much need in this city. And so I am a bit reluctant to cut off a form of repayment on a program that is really sounds like working as a revolving loan fund. I'd be totally open to reducing the amount of payment, making it over 30 years, whatever. Like, I get it. I get why you all are interested, and I'm not going to necessarily vote against it, but I think it has some complications and repercussions we should be thinking through.
It does. One of the things I do want to point out is SEPA is doing all of our construction management right now, and the intent has never been to move only to the owner-occupied rehab program funding through IDA. We want to maintain our Cdbg funding to focus it on the eligible to the needs, both the rental and the trusts and things that aren't eligible for the other one is really what we're looking at.
And so if there's a way to fold in homes in trusts in another little pool, I mean, I imagine it's a very—
We can do it with Cdbg.
Okay, so then maybe we don't need it. I just don't like the idea of being kicked out.
Yeah. No, we don't want to do so what it is that we have to be able to say, oh, this is an owner-occupied home, but it's in a trust. So this one has to be Cdbg. Oh, this one is not.
Yeah,
this
okay, as
one
long as we have an alternative.
Yeah.
So then I guess I would just say the forgivable piece. It just feels like there's so much need.
And there are considerations that we could do, such as, I mean, at one point we were discussing, well, maybe we say if the owner is, or for an owner occupied, if the owner is below 50% AMI, maybe then it's forgivable or something like that. But I got to tell you, the rate of housing burden on everybody has grown so much.
It's so high. No, and like I said, I get it. I just want to think
but that would absolutely be something for discussion as well. And so that maybe, if SEPA gets funded for the owner occupied, and then we can kind of look at it, and it would officially have to be something that this committee would vote on. But this is a decision that the committee is empowered to do, which is how the CDBG program is managed. This is the type of decision that the committee can make without taking it to council. That's one of the administrative rules within the CDBG program of the housing rehab program, has always been under the authority of this committee, and before it, the Housing and Community Development Act.
So one of our few powers.
Yes. Yes.
Well, thank you.
Ugo, you want to go next?
Thank you very much. Yes, and even though Councilmember Burns and Lauren already addressed a couple of my questions, I still have one, and it is, so the applications for these loans, would they be made through SEPA or through the city of Evanston? If through the city of Evanston, where and with whom would people apply for?
Right now, they are made to the city of Evanston. And people who are interested in applying, there is the requirement that the occupying household income be at or below 80% of area median and all those things. The easiest way is to have them contact our 311 system, and they will direct that to Chris Renard, who handles our intake. But what's really good about going through 311 is then we have a easily tracked record of it, and it's easier to tell people than giving them other names and email addresses.
Yeah, and I'm really glad to see the 80% below average.
That's a
median
HUD
income.
requirement.
Yeah, I'm really glad for that too. And now on one of the topics, one of the questions that Lauren had in regards to trust, that trust requirement is placed by IDA. Is that correct?
IDA has it on its funding. HUD does not have that restriction on CDBG funding, but many communities, including Evanston, have had this in their policies and procedures. And I think it was largely when everything was being done as loans. And of course, one of the key things is how do you can put a loan on a trust, property in a trust. It's just a little more complicated than when you don't have a trust. And so that's why I think it has not been used in many situations. But as I say, we worked, and this was something we worked well when Michelle Mason Cup was here, because we had an applicant whose home was in a trust, who was income eligible, and the initial response was, no, well, your home's in a trust. Why can't you? So we can't accept this. And this person's question was, well, why should that make me ineligible? And so we really looked into why it was there, and it was just there it's one of those, they talk about systemic barriers. They've been put in at some point and nobody really looks at them. And so these are the types of things that I think it's really important that we try to evaluate and remove when we are able to.
Yeah, and I'm totally in agreement with what Lauren said about trust. I think that it's an important tool for home ownership and for succession on that home ownership. And I think that should be more education about it. So perhaps to address this requirement from IDA, our legal department can probably look into it and see if there is a bridge that can be made. So people that have those trusts can kind of create a bypass to it and still be able to easily apply for those loans instead of making more cumbersome for those just because they do have a trust for the property.
Well, I know that SEPA has asked and challenged IDA's requirement that, or in the has challenged IDA because it has this as a criterion in their program that a home couldn't be in a trust to be eligible. And I think that's going to take something more than our legal system people. I mean, we can certainly try to continue to ask them to remove it, but it's not something that I think is really within our control.
So Sarah, so we're gonna know, is it in December that we'll find out whether IDA is getting that funding? So
Whether SEBA is getting the funding. So
Yeah.
depending on when it is in December, we may be able to bring it to the committee in December, or we might have to bring it in January, just
Right,
depending
right.
on that time.
Okay. Well, it does sound as though the committee is very interested in moving in that direction to some extent anyway. So why don't we plan to, have revisit this conversation either in December or January
Yes.
with the idea of some kind of proposal then that we move forward with to make some changes, I guess, to the loan rehab loan repayment situation.
Right.
Okay, so I'm cognizant of the time. We have another 15 minutes. And we had one other discussion. You were going to give us an overview of because at 2022, we're supposed to review our inclusionary housing ordinance.
Yes. Yes. And staff has begun this process.
Mhm.
And one of the things we wanted to let you know of kind of how the schedule we've outlined, it's aggressive. I hope we can continue on it. But the whole purpose is to expand affordable housing, either by creating units or getting payments, the Affordable Housing Fund. Our current IHO is pretty effective at getting units now, and that does two things. First of all, the IHO fees do not allow us to generate units without layering funding into something with other funding, just based on, even though we have among the highest fees in lieu in the entire area. I think only downtown Chicago has higher fees in lieu. Ours are really pretty substantial. But we also have in our IHO that we will review the structure of it. So this is the year we're reviewing that. And if we can go to the next slide. So we're exploring how IHO requirements integrate with incentives for planned developments. How can we better incentivize units? Even in one of the ways is to that we're looking at is how does that become also, in addition to after the IHO requirement, can we incentivize additional units or more units to that would be a public benefit, which is one of the things that our planned developments have to provide, and how to do that effectively and how to actually quantify the value of that is interesting. It's something that you can quantify with affordable units because you can really show what benefit it provides over the years of the reduced rents and all that stuff for the period of time. We're looking at the scale of IHO requirements based on the size of the development. One of the things with our current IHO is it applies to all projects of 5 units or more, residential units or more. And when you have 1 out of 5 units that has to be affordable, because that's the fewest you can have, it's clearly more than a 10% requirement. And how does that work out? And is that an undue burden on the smaller developments? Another thing is the calculation is pretty complicated because we have a system that you have a base number of units, and then depending on how many affordable units you have on site, then you get bonus units. And we'd like to make it simpler so people can follow it more easily. There's another big feature, and that is the state of Illinois has property tax reductions or incentives for developments with 20% of units on site affordable to households with incomes that do not exceed 60% of the area median income. This was approved last midsummer either at the very end of the last fiscal year or the beginning of this one, and it is being rolled out. And so this would actually give a multi-year property tax reduction that is in the form of tax credits, interestingly enough, to developers who have over a 15-year period for affordable units on site. That is one of the things we hear all the time when we're asking, or, you know, pushing for affordable units. We want more affordable units, but that means the developers have more lost income from those affordable units, and they're trying to figure out how to offset it. So this is this is a major way of offsetting some of the costs, because it reduces the property tax on those affordable units in essence for a 15-year period. And so we have to learn how to use that to leverage more units. The city of Chicago has put its ARO requirement at 20% of units affordable on site because of that. So expect to see a recommendation of something in that realm. And then we have a whole list of other little things that we put in there that we want to look at that will make it either easier to understand or easier to implement. We have a number of other bonuses for on-site units, bonuses and parking reductions, for example, that we want to look at how those, I believe our parking overall has to be looked at, not just in our inclusionary program, buildings with inclusionary units, but overall we have to look at a bunch of different things, and those have to be considered as part of the IHO. There are communities that we sometimes look as comparable communities that are doing quite forward-thinking things in terms of parking reductions, like Ann Arbor, which is now not requiring parking, which is quite astounding. So those are the types of things we want to look at and evaluate how we should change any of those restrictions, which ones work, which ones don't, that sort of thing. We have different parking restrictions or requirements in TOD areas. We have, so we've got a bunch of different things we need to be looking at. One of the other considerations that has already been raised is looking at, can we extend the period of time of affordability? That is something certainly we will look at. It can be a balancing act. One of the reasons we're at 30 years of affordability for on-site units right now for rental and ownership, of which we have none so far, but has a permanent affordability requirement because the affordability resets with each sale. So it's income restricted at resale. So, we have to look at all that. So next slide. So what we really want to do is get your feedback. So if anybody has things they want us to look at, please feel free to email them to me and we'll add them to the list. Here's our timeline. We've started working on this. We're going to continue to consult with interested parties and to see how our process is working. We hope to have proposed changes in the December to share in the December to February timeframe, with the goal of coming to City Council for planning and development in City Council. This is unlike most of our, one of the things we really do need, maybe not planning and development, I take that back. We will have a different review. Recommendations from the Housing and Community Development Committee can go straight to council, except in this case, a change to the IHO is a zoning change, so it has to go through the Land Use Commission. So that's the complicating factor we have to work out on that.
Yeah, okay, so Councilmember Reed's had his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sarah, for the in-depth review. I made a referral relating to this, and I think this is, my referral will be wrapped up in this, which is analyzing. Councilmember Burns and I, at the time we were in the clerk's office, have held a lot of a number of meetings with folks at the time around PB, but we were particularly meeting with David Reifman's office in Chicago, which is essentially their Planning and Development Department. I'm forgetting the exact name of the department in Chicago. And one of the things that I found really interesting about what they're doing, Chicago actually is one of the leaders on gaining resources for affordable housing through their inclusionary housing ordinance, as well as public benefit reform. And so as well as FAR bonuses and other bonuses that folks can get. And so Chicago doesn't give bonuses, FAR bonuses or other bonuses for public benefits. They strictly sell those bonuses and then put those funds into their affordable housing fund. They allow folks to build, for example, if there's a development in the 5th Ward, and it would likely work the opposite of this more often than not, but let's just say there's a development in the 5th Ward and they wanted to build the affordable units downtown or in the 6th or 7th Ward or somewhere else, they'd be allowed to do that. They have, spur spreading affordable housing around. They have really neat laws around whether or not, so example, maybe a struggling area of the 8th Ward, for example, you'd have a lower penalty for opting out of the affordable housing units. And the idea behind that is there are some areas that are quite saturated with affordable housing, and to spur more mixed income areas, you'd allow for exemptions to the to the affordable housing requirements. So I just love to explore that, and particularly I am particularly interested in parking. I think that is a huge cost that is borne both by developers and by folks who are not drivers and live in apartments, and they're still paying the cost of constructing the parking lot. It's wrapped up in their rent. So Sarah, I'd love to sit down with you during this process and talk more about this.
Absolutely. We're happy to meet with you and any other council member.
I'd love to loop in Chicago's department as well if we haven't had conversations with them recently.
Yes, we are looking at their ARO and stuff. You can take, but absolutely, yes. And the way the public benefit thing, so it goes into a fund, does give them flexibility to not have that public benefits have to be within a geographic range and things like that. And I think many of those things are very creative and well thought out, and absolutely we need to be looking at those. So I appreciate you bringing this up, and I know that these are things we need to explore thoroughly.
Yeah, and Sarah's very, very encouraging, not only of council members, but any other members of the committee who
Absolutely.
have
Absolutely.
have a conversation or share an idea. And if you have sort of an interim presentation before you're ready to give us the full update, that might be a good idea too. So we have another conversation before you're ready.
And that's something that I think Liz and I want to plan out, like where are we and what things are we looking at, because it is not going to be something that we think we should come. Here it is, fully baked, please approve.
Yeah, exactly, right. A lot of discussion. Good. Okay, and a little bit of an update from staff.
Yes, so we just have a brief update on the small landlord task force. So we are in the data analysis portion of the small landlord assistance program timeline. We ended our outreach and closed the surveys on September 2nd, and we received 53 responses. 6 of them were in paper format, and 47 were through the SurveyMonkey. So right now we're just analyzing all of the data and determining the need. And this is just some unit data. Very briefly, the highest amount of units owned by small and medium landlords is 23 units. The lowest is 1. On average, small and medium landlords own 4 units, in the city of Evanston, and the most popular or the mode of small and medium landlord units is 2. So we'll continue on with data analysis until we meet with the small landlord task force on the 28th, and then we will be able to start program design.
Great, great, thank you. Is there any other issues to, oh, okay, reminders, what is this about?
So for public facilities, we have received those money allocations, and we will be making the decisions of who will be getting the funding by the end of the year. And next year, we will be able to start taking in applications.
So as you may recall, in our action plan, we have money from 2021 set aside, that was originally set aside for public facilities for that were not city projects within our livable communities goals. And so we have some work to do to get ready to open the application for that. But that's what Anna's referring to, that we will open the application so that they are able to apply, and we will have to have some training and some reminders, because it's been a while since we've had this application. But we do want to bring applications to the committee for review relatively early in 2023, with the hope of getting those allocated so that we can then go ahead and get their projects started. I also want to remind this committee that the public services funding estimate for 2023 is going to be rolled into the application for funding that the Social Services Committee will be opening for the ongoing services that are funded through that program. We have our case management, robust case management, and our safety net programs. That's the funding model. And right now we have an application open for supportive services. Those are the mental health services that will be using money that is not yet expended from 2022. And so the application that will be being opened in October for social services will be for the 2023 case management and safety net services. Just want to remind this committee of that, because that will show up in the draft action plan as a lump sum, but that's handled by our sister
committee.
Yes.
Okay. Councilmember Reed, you still have your hand up? Is that from before, or do you?
Yes, sorry, that's from before.
Okay, right. So is that everything from staff?
That's all we have. I hope that
that's funny. Yeah. So it's 9 o'clock, and I didn't know if anybody in the audience out there is still hoping to give public comment.
Yes, I would like to make public comment.
Okay.
Okay, so I have a couple of things. One, who decides that the $325,000 a year from Cdbg goes to property standards? Is that voted on in the budget every year, or who decides that? Number two is the IHO in Evanston is currently 50 or 60% AMI. I think this committee and the city council needs to readjust their inclusionary housing ordinance, because as it stands, HUD is 30% AMI. So many of the new buildings, and I asked the link this question, would they be accepting Section 8, which is HUD and 30% AMI? So right now, any of these new developments do not have to take Section 8, or even many of the programs with connections. TBRA is goes with the HUD of, 30% AMI and so forth. And this is just another way to discriminate against low-income housing. Also, it appears that the large buildings are getting all the bonuses. You talk about large buildings or 5 units or more. I qualify in a couple of these things for the property tax benefits, but I provide in my 2 flats 3 and 4 bedroom units. So you're just throwing me under the bus because I don't get any tax credit. I can't get any money because, oh, you have all these things for the forgivable loan, and it's not going to really be forgivable. And if I have my property to trust, you can't get any money. So this is just time after time that you're really eliminating money for the small landlords that are down in the dirt, providing these units for affordable housing. Real affordable housing is HUD standard, which is 30% AMI. And so you're giving these big buildings all this money or all these tax benefits, and they don't even really have to provide low income housing. And you cut us out of home improvements and stalling around with money. It's just a disgrace. And why would anybody want to continue to provide affordable housing when we keep getting stabbed in the back year after year? It's just a disgrace. And I hope this committee will reconsider some of the things that's going on for the small landlord that's really providing HUD standard, which is 30% AMI, which is what many buildings, Albion, the E2 Reserve, the Link, none of these places are taking these programs. And then you want to ask a landlord like myself, or there's very few of me, to take 30% AMI, and then we don't get any help. You just give it to the big developers. Sounds like discrimination, and you're really hurting the affordable housing ability to create more or retain the affordable housing that is there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we're all looking forward to the report from the Small Landlord Task Force. I think we'll have some good ideas. So Anna, is there anybody else in the raising a hand? I mean, I'm hoping we can adjourn.
No other questions are being asked.
Great. Okay. Well then, everybody, it is the magic hour, and our next meeting is October 18th. So we certainly had a robust discussion this evening. I think we clarified a lot of things that we were confused about at the beginning, and look forward to seeing everybody next month. And thanks very much for being part of the conversation tonight.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, staff.
Bye-bye.
Stay
Thank
well,
you.
everyone.
Good night.